guys? Welcome to another edition of the Anything But Everything podcast. I once again want to thank you, everyone who's tuning in. Thank you to all the loyal subscribers who are subscribed to the channel or are currently viewing this video. Once again, I am back here with another guest today. We are going to be talking about a little bit of a touchy subject, which does tie in and has a lot to do with anxiety, depression, stress. Once again, full disclosure, just like with every other episode that I've posted, anyone who talks on this podcast is not a trained therapist, shrink, or psychologist. However, it is very much real people who have gone through real experiences and are here to share them today and to help everyone out who is listening. With that said, I am here with another guest today who was a part of a kind of a difficult time in my life. We are here today to talk about death. Death is something that hits everyone eventually. You never know when it's coming. It can hit us at any time in life. And usually it's the group of people that we're surrounded by at that time who are able to help us out and help us get through it. With that said, I am here with my special guest today, Anas. And Anas, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Now, kind of want to give a little backstory before we get into this. So, you know, you were my French professor
Yes.
when I was still here in high school.
Yes.
And unfortunately, around that time, I was 15 years old. My father tragically passed away. I was going through a very difficult time. You were there. I would come into class eventually, and we would sometimes have, small talks here and there.
Right.
And, you do have a personal story to share today that ties in with death. What was going on in your life right before your mother passed away?
So my mother was, at the time, as I know, I'm originally from Morocco. So my mom was living in Morocco her entire life. And then I moved here, sort of half of the family moved here. And then and we went to school. My brothers and I got careers and we started living here. And so the idea was that the parents would eventually come live with us.
Right.
And so at the time, my mom was still working. She was healthy. And then there's sort of a backstory to this story. So I have a brother who passed away in an accident. And that was so abrupt that I never really got to process the feeling
Right.
of losing him. And I never really thought of how much of an impact it could have on a mother to lose a child. So that part was sort of foreign to me, but it was still there. And also, I never really gave it much thought because I was sort of dealing with my own emotions with my brother. So that backstory led to, I don't know if it has any correlation with my mom. Losing her life, but my mom, after my brother's death, sort of just her health snowballed. My mom has always had poor health, but
So she was traumatized.
She was traumatized, as we all were, and I dealt with sort of my own issues losing my brother. I had therapy, but my mom at the time was here, and she does not speak the language. So it was hard for us to find her any therapist. And I also come from a culture where therapy or mental illness has a stigma to it. You're supposed to be strong. You're supposed to accept whatever comes your way. So
It's not really addressed.
It's not addressed, and you're supposed to sort of bottle those feelings.
Right.
And so I was not aware of the effect of losing a child would have on her. So as I said, her health just kept getting worse and worse. She eventually was diagnosed with cancer. Besides all the other issues that she had diabetes, she had heart issues, and
Whole bunch of things.
Whole bunch of things that she had to deal with. And she, at the time, as I said, she was living in Morocco, and she made the decision to come live here
Right.
to get better health. And so that's what she did. And sort of... it was a good 6-7 years of struggle between depression that I now understand why, because she lost someone that sort of shouldn't happen. You're supposed to, parents always feel that they're supposed to go first before their children.
the child. Yeah.
But we never addressed that issue.
Yeah.
It became sort of a taboo to talk about it. It
Right.
was just shove it to the side and
Right.
not talk about it. And so her health sort of fluctuated. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad, and I was aware of my mom's unhappiness, but I couldn't do anything about it because, what can I? I can't bring back her son. I can't do anything to make her feel better, and so that the mental state that she was in eventually affected her physical health.
Right.
There's such a strong bond between the two.
Of course.
And so fast forward to 6 years later, is when she passed. And it was one of those deaths where, I'm 37 years old. I've had the unfortunate luck of experiencing two different deaths. One was abrupt, and sort of there's a shock effect. You don't know how to process that one. And the other one is...
You kind of see coming.
You kind of see it coming.
Yeah.
And people always told me, well, you dealt with the first one. This one's supposed to be easier because you saw the decline. And I can honestly tell you, it's all a bunch of BS, because seeing it coming doesn't make it any better.
Right.
And the one thing that I really struggled with was the fact that people always told me, well, of all your siblings, you get to spend the most time with her. Contrary to what your siblings ended up doing, is not having her for such an extended period of time. But I felt like the fact that I get to spend so much time with her, the ups and the downs, affected me in a negative way more than in a positive way. I could tell you, even 2 years later, I could still tell you I'm not at that stage where I look at, the memories. People tell you eventually the bad becomes the good, and you start looking at the positive instead of the negative. I know for a fact that I'm not there yet.
So, I think this would be an appropriate time for me to kind of tie in, where I can kind of meet you halfway. So again, it's like I said at the beginning, I was 15. So yeah, much like your mom's death, I saw my dad's death coming. The nurse would always try to, hide it from me. But of course, I was 15, but I still understood, I was young, not stupid. And when it hit, it's so funny because once my dad passed away, before I had lost, grandparents, I had lost faraway relatives. It's very, very much different when it's a parent. And I would like to think that depending on which parent it is, you're going to process death a little bit differently. So I can sympathize when people were telling you, no big deal. It's a very tough thing. When it hits, you don't know how to feel about it. It's very different. You feel like while you've been through it before, it's almost something new, something that you've never experienced.
Right.
So I definitely went through that tough time, and you would see me, I would come to class, and some days were more depressing than others. But it's just one of those things where there has to come to a time where you kind of get the train back on the tracks. You have to start going about your day, because being cooped up at home, it's not going to help you. As a matter of fact, it's going to be quite the opposite.
Right.
And of course, you have to be ready to take that step to get out there and, get your social life going again. Of course, it's never an easy thing. So, so your mom passes away, and your brother had passed away as well. I know at that time you said you were also in a relationship. So what was that like when your mom passed away?
Well, I've always, in my experiences as far as relationships go, it's a cliche, but you can't rely on someone to give you comfort or to pick you up if you can't pick up yourself. There's only so much the other person can do, and also it's like they don't know what you're going through, and they try. I'm telling you, my partner, she helped me so much to try to pick me up. I just couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. There was no light. You start thinking, you sort of playing a lot of images in your head. When I get married, my mom won't be there. When I have children, my mom won't be there. You start thinking of all these life events, and you start doubting the point of having these life-changing events, because an important sort of support system is not there. So I started questioning a lot of things. And you know, and eventually the other person gets tired, but gets deflated
Yeah.
because they can't make you happy.
Right.
And as cliche as I said, as it sounds, you have to find that happiness within, and the people you're with just compliment you. They don't make you happy, and sort of that was the struggle. Was I sort of started sort of comparing myself to her and to her family and to well, she still has her brother, she still has her mom, and I knew that wasn't the healthiest way to go about
Right.
it. And when you fall into the comparison trap, it's
lethal.
it's very lethal. It could be very damaging to yourself, because we all compare. You look at people who have something you don't have, and you start sort of questioning,
Doubting everything.
why, and asking questions that eventually lead nowhere. So that was the biggest struggle when it comes to my relationship. Yeah.
And so, with that kind of on the table, where would you say that point was where you started processing, like, okay, here's the cards that I've been dealt. How do you go about dealing with it? What were those steps that you had to take?
Well, you at some point when you're in your own darkness, you just realize, okay, so the world is not stopping. Nobody, you turn on TV, it's the same shows. Your friends can only sympathize as much as they can, but they go back to their lives. And that was the hardest thing to me. And if there's any advice I could give people is, you have to be ready. You have to be okay being alone, because I experienced that firsthand, where you've got people and they're showing you the support, but they can't stay forever.
Right.
And it would be selfish of the person going through this to think, okay, why is nobody here? That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Why doesn't anybody care? But it's not that they don't care, it's that they've done what they could do, and there's nothing else they could do, and eventually you have to face it. And that's sort of what I was avoiding. So eventually, to answer your question about coping, you process it. You play different scenarios in your head, and you question a lot of things, but nothing changes. You can cry all night, all day. You could stop working. You could stop your life, but the world doesn't stop. It keeps going. So
Time
for
continues.
me, right. To me, as cliche as it sounds, life does go on, and I mean, as you knew, I'm a teacher, so I still had to come to work. I still had kids to teach. I still had appointments to respect, deadlines to honor. All that kind of stuff gave me a little boost, but I realized that I was sort of not facing the real issue. I would go to work, put on a mask, and then go home, and sort of those feelings of emptiness and would pop up. And it was a good 6-7 months of that, of looking perfectly fine in public, but being at home was a different story. And so one day, and I don't know if this is gonna happen to everyone, but one day I just woke up, and it's sort of, I don't know if it's divine intervention, whatever it was. I just woke up one day and I just realized, you know what? This is it. This is how I cannot continue living my life this way. And funny thing about that is that sadness is a real thing. Sadness, depression,
100%.
anxiety.
Yes.
It's real. Everyone has to go through it at some point. But it's one of those feelings that almost your mind and your body doesn't want to deal with for a long time. Your body and your mind wants you to feel good, so it does everything it could to sort of take those feelings, those negative feelings out of you. It doesn't want you to dwell in it, and that's sort of what happened to me. Is that I just didn't feel. I felt like something inside me was fighting all these feelings, and trying to break free, like go out, get some sun, see people, And that's eventually what I did. I just started thinking, I can't be the only one. And also, you go through the motions of, well, I'm sure there are still people who care about you and want you to be doing well. You just can't expect them to make you whole again. 'Cause
Right.
I honestly feel, I don't know if you feel the same way. I'll never be the same person, and that's okay. It's okay to be a little broken. It's okay to be a little sad at times. I mean, there isn't one thing, I'm sure, for you as well, that I don't think about my mom or my brother. It's every single moment of the day, they pop in,
Right.
and but it's different from how it used to be. It's sad, but it's very short lived, and it doesn't stop me from going about my day. And this is no secret. Is keeping yourself busy, being active, really trying to just enjoy what life has to offer. Helps a lot. I know for a fact, dwelling on in your feelings, just eating your feelings up in bed, and it doesn't really help. So.
100%, yeah, I can say a whole bunch of things that you listed there. I 100% agree with. These experiences, when we go through them, we are never the same person. And I don't know if maybe you felt this at some point in time, but there comes to a point where you say, oh, things were much better back in the day. Things were much better before all this happened. There comes to a point where, especially when, as you said, when that moment comes when anxiety hits and you kind of figure out what it is and,
Right.
what your body and your brain is trying to tell you,
Right.
you realize that, hey, even back during those times, there was all these problems, but it wasn't exactly at the forefront because my brain and body was not as well communicating with me back then as it is now.
Right.
And yeah, I advocate that all the time. That was my biggest, piece of advice to everyone. Anytime when life hits, anytime when you have a struggle, get out there, talk to someone, find, your support system.
Right.
You keep it bottled up inside, as you said, you go, 7 months, kind of swimming in those feelings,
Right.
and you're not able to reach that comfort zone or that closure.
Right.
And yeah, I think it was the same deal for me too. After my dad passed away, there was a lot of staying at home,
Right.
looking at photographs, looking at videos, just kind of reminiscing because I felt like it was the only way that I could still see him.
Right.
Going to his funeral was by far one of the toughest things that I've ever had to stand up and do. I can remember I didn't want to go because as a 15-year-old, it's,
Right.
How do you even process, how do you begin to process that?
Yeah.
For 3 nights, I couldn't sleep, and it was a big mess, but the one takeaway was that I can remember, so I'm 15, I'm living with my mom, my dad has just passed away, I have relatives coming, from all sides of the family telling
Right.
me, you got to be the man of the house now.
Mm.
And I always go back and say, what does a 15-year-old understand of, be the man of the
Right.
house?
Right.
But now I realize it just means that some of us, whether we like it or not, are forced to grow up a little bit more early than
Yeah.
expected. Sometimes life hits and you get hit with all these responsibilities and all these things that you have to learn. A lot of people think, oh, when I turn 18 or 21 or when I get older,
Right.
sometimes life just throws it at you, and it doesn't care if you're ready for it. It's just up to you to deal with it.
Right.
So, with all this said, and I know it's a very emotional thing. It's a very touchy subject, and
Right.
I trust that whoever is listening to this right now has experienced and love and loss to some extent. I know you probably answered this question, but I usually like to close off by saying your biggest piece of advice, anything that you probably have not mentioned thus far, your biggest piece of advice on if anyone out there is maybe if they know someone is about to pass or someone has passed and they're having a hard time to deal with it, what would be your piece of advice?
Well, full disclosure, I feel that every situation is different. It's really interesting because when my mom was diagnosed with cancer, the doctor said, well, there are a lot of people who get the same exact cancer, the same exact tumor, but the way your body reacts to it is so unique to each individual. I mean, think of how many people are on this planet. you can give the same, you can plant the same tumor in every person, and everyone's body is going to react differently.
Yeah.
So that's the analogy I'm trying to draw here between that and dealing with death.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you can't give advice. My biggest advice to the listeners is don't cut out the people who care about you. They're gonna become your punching bag, but you can't forget that they're human, and that punching bag eventually gets tired or gets deflated, and that's sort of what I did. Is the one person I'm talking specifically about, my girlfriend, she was there day in and day out when everyone else left, and I just thought I could just be mean and depressed and not really think about how she must be feeling, and when all she wanted to do was help, and I thought that was fine, because I thought what I'm doing is justifiable, because I can always use but look what happened to me card.
Yeah.
And I realized that wasn't fair for that person in particular, because nobody's spared from sadness and from dealing with this. So again, just to bring it back full circle, lean on your support system, and it doesn't have to be 20 people, it doesn't have to be 15, it doesn't have to be any of that, but just it could be one person that you can go to, and even if they get frustrated with you or you get frustrated with them, just know that that's very important, because you need someone to carry you a little bit, but they can't carry you all the way. Eventually
You can't break their back.
Yeah,
basically.
you can't, and eventually you have to carry yourself, and that's what I've learned. And there's only so much another person can do for you, but eventually it's your decision. So that's what I would say.
100% agreed. There you go, guys. You heard it here. And yes, I do concur with that 100%. I've always said that the most that someone can understand you is 99%, because no one will ever be able to fully understand you or what you're going through.
Right.
But it is very important. It is a must that, to talk with someone. As you said, it doesn't have to be a dozen people, even if it's one person. Lean on them a bit. They'll understand exactly where you're coming from, because death is a very hardcore thing to go through.
Right.
And the other person, if they are understanding to hear you out, they are understanding that, okay, so-and-so is going through a rough time.
Yeah.
At least I can do is lend them an ear and say, hey, vent, do whatever you got to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there you go, guys. That wraps up another episode and another edition of the Anything But Everything podcast. Once again, Anas, thank you so much for sharing your experience. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
I feel like, whoever listens to this can definitely take something away or reach some type of comfort zone. So once again, guys, that wraps it up for another episode of the Anything But Everything podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you all next time.